Hello, darling. Welcome. What follows is an embodied, unfurling stutter and flow of the intersections of my gender, ethnicity, and sexuality. Weird way to start a paper.
I don't even know what to say.
Hey guys, I'm Brad Polumbo.
And I'm Colin Wright.
And welcome to the third episode of our new podcast, Citation Needed, where we're doing deep dives into the absurd world of academia and going over the most bizarre woke research that's out there. Today, we're going to look at a PhD dissertation entitled A Brief History of My Gendered Body, an Autoethnographic Exploration of Trans, Queer, and Cuban Embodiment. Help us out here, Colin. What the heck is that supposed to mean? What's this paper about?
Okay, this one's extremely tough to summarize because it's just kind of so out there and bizarre. It's almost impossible to really just grab your hands onto. It's like, when I was reading, it's like trying to grab smoke. It's just this formless thing that just continually evades you. So it's actually a lot easier, I find, to criticize much less crazy papers, because it's usually pretty easy to see where they veer off course into the ditch. But with a paper like this, it doesn't even really start on any perceivable path. It's just kind of like being dropped right in the middle of a vast wilderness. So maybe it's best if I just let the authors, or we let the authors, summarize the work for herself. She does this in the first part of the abstract, which she calls, this is an odd way to say it, an abstract of sorts, whatever that means. So do you want to do a dramatic reading for us here?
Yes, I will. And guys, remember, this is an academic paper. This is a PhD dissertation.
PhD.
Hello, darling. Welcome. What follows is an embodied, unfurling stutter and flow of the intersections of my gender, ethnicity, and sexuality. It's a tale of one body throughout 4 cities in 5 parts as an autoethnography. In sum, it's an autoethnographic love letter to myself and my communities. Weird way to start a paper.
I don't even know what to say. I mean, hello, darling, and embodied unfurling. Like, we're giving people PhDs to write love letters to themselves. I'm not really quite sure people realize the current dismal state of academia. And then we see that word again. We've seen it before, and we will see it again. Autoethnography. This is just this totally subjective journal or diary entry that's being passed off as academic scholarship. So this is dark.
And it's like the top level of scholarship they're using to certify PhDs. You're not supposed, this isn't just run-of-the-mill stuff. This is career-defining stuff. And she basically did a weird diary entry. Who is this person?
So the author's name is Annalena Hernandez, and she is a clinical psychology PhD student at Point Park University, and that's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And remind us what clinical psychology is again.
Yeah, so it's a profession that's supposed to help people with mental health issues, emotional challenges, various behavioral problems. It uses therapy to treat things like anxiety, depression, and trauma. So it's quite important for these people to be mentally sane, as you might imagine.
You would think so, right? You'd think you'd want your therapist to have it together, but I mean, is this woman as delulu as her little abstract of sorts seems to suggest, or is she just more normal and this is just one weird example? I don't know.
Yeah, well, her university profile didn't come across as particularly delulu, I suppose. But she is part, and I had to do some digging here, she's part of the university's social justice psychology research team. So there's at
Red
least some
flags.
clues. Yeah, red flags, some clues that something perhaps lurks behind the scenes. And doing a little more digging into the document itself, it was in the actual dissertation, she revealed herself to be what she considers a transgender fluid lesbian. So there's some signals.
I feel like we could do an unpacking on that because I have questions, but where was this PhD paper or dissertation? Where was this published?
Yeah, so like most other PhDs, it's published like by the university itself. So Point Park University in Pittsburgh. Um, this is a point where we made a little bit earlier, but Hernandez, the author of this paper, was bestowed a PhD in clinical psychology for this work, for this unfurling, if you will. And keep in mind, too, that her future job as a clinical psychologist will require her to work with other people to diagnose and treat their mental health issues. Yet this dissertation, being an autoethnography, is all about her feelings and her personal story. So this doesn't make any sense on its face.
No, I mean, this woman is becoming basically a therapist, right? Like a counselor.
Yeah.
And yet her own mental health seems to be suspect, as some of this will
Questionable.
come into play and be quite clear. But before we get into the details, let's just go over a couple key terms. I think the first one we want to remind people is autoethnography.
Yeah, we'll keep coming back to this one. We won't probably define it in every episode. I think our viewers and listeners will kind of just understand what we're talking about at some point. But it's this totally subjective act of writing about one's own feelings and emotions in relation to something else. So how this became an acceptable practice in modern academia is just truly beyond me at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's not research. We've talked about this. It's just like journaling, but it's being published and passed off as research. Now, I also noticed she kept over and over again, she kept saying embodiment, embodiment, embodiment. And I mean, obviously, I know what that word means in general, but in this context, what is she talking about exactly when she says embodiment?
It's one of those terms that it sounds really maybe profound, like there's a lot more underneath it, but it really just is kind of this banal meaning when you get down to it. So embodiment kind of refers to the way that our identities, and they would say things like gender, sexuality, race, or ethnicity, how they're not just abstract concepts, but they're lived and expressed through our physical bodies, actions, and experiences. It's like, yes, these things aren't just abstract concepts. I mean, who actually thinks of it this way?
So it's like not just, your race being your race, but the embodiment of it is how it affects your day-to-day life or your real life or your experiences.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so we've got our vocabulary covered. We always need a little bit of a woke dictionary lesson before we dive into one of these. What was the thesis of this paper, or did it even have one? I guess I should ask, because again, it is one of these academic journal diaries.
Yeah, they're not like those scientific papers where it's just like all mapped out, like, introduction, here's the methods and everything, results, conclusion. So
Yeah,
at
these
the
don't we
end of
don't do
the,
results on this podcast.
yeah. No, not at all. Those are out. Um, at the end of the first chapter, so the author says, quote, I'm inviting you to converse with my narrative, to laugh alongside it, to cry alongside it, to be embarrassed alongside it, to question it, to have curiosities. In process and content, I want to evoke within the reader, not merely stimulate cognitive contemplation. So I'm glad we're being invited to laugh and perhaps participate in some level of embarrassment, because I mean, I don't think we could help ourselves with this dissertation, which she also calls a call to action to better the lives of, quote, queer, trans, and Cuban folks.
Well, I mean, she explicitly asked for it with love, so that's gonna change everything. Racism has been defeated.
So I'm not sure if anything is more actively harmful to the public perception of queer, trans, and Cuban folks than insane dissertations like this one, to be honest.
Yeah, and just bad representation in general is a real problem for a lot of these groups. But let's try to take this paper seriously. What was the methodology, if there even was one? Again, not always a methodology to these things, but let's try to unpack it.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, this clinical psychology dissertation, it's an autoethnography, which is super bizarre, again, given what clinical psychologists actually do. Dissertations typically require a student to demonstrate they've made sort of a novel or valuable contribution to knowledge in the specific field. And they usually require you to devise an experiment of some sort, and actually collect and analyze data.
Well, nothing about this paper so far is giving novel, is giving experiment, or is giving data. I mean, have clinical psychology PhD dissertations always been like this? Like, has it always been kind of a pie in the sky field, or is this new?
That's what I wanted to ask myself because if you don't have context for these things, it's easy. Just maybe it's always been crazy, and we just didn't know about this. I mean, that would be concerning in its own right. So just for fun, I looked up clinical psychology PhDs from about 15 years ago, a very simple Google search. So one of the first search results was from the University of Massachusetts in Boston. This dissertation is titled Understanding Revictimization, the Impact of Emotion Suppression, Acceptance, and PTSD Symptomology on Risk Detection Abilities in Sexual Assault Survivors. So this sounds, I understood all the words. That's a good start. Here's a quick example of just a quick outline of the methods in the abstract. Well, first you'll note that the abstract didn't begin with "Hello, darling," but then it goes. So this is an abstract of like their methods. We won't get into this paper in any detail, but 48 survivors of sexual assault were assigned to either an emotion suppression, an emotion acceptance, or a no instruction control condition, and completed 2 computerized risk detection tasks, 1 safety perception task, an open-ended behavioral responding task, and an assessment of PTSD symptoms experienced during the tasks. So, okay, an actual experiment with various experimental groups, control groups. This is what I would basically expect as the bare minimum of someone getting a PhD in clinical psychology. But our author, Hernandez, she doesn't run an experiment at all. Forget a sample size of 48 that this paper used. She doesn't even have a sample size of 1. She's just interviewing herself.
Is interviewing yourself, is that technically a sample size of 0 or 1?
I mean, undefined. It's not. It's absolutely nothing. It's just like one of those abstract,
I mean,
made up numbers.
yes, interviewing yourself. Who among us doesn't regularly do that? But joking aside, this methodology seems, to the layperson here, kind of at odds with the whole point of their field, which is about working with others, not yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that the author, in the abstract of sorts that she wrote, actually reveals why we're both so perplexed about this dissertation's non-methodology. It's because she actively and explicitly rejects the methods of her entire field. Brad, can you read this part of the abstract for us, please?
Yes, absolutely. Psychology's canon does not reflect most of me, and therefore has very little place here. Oh, psychology's canon has very little place in her psychology PhD dissertation. Back to the quote. It is an invalidation based in white supremacist epistemic injustice to be expected to justify experiences, observations, and ideas by citing respectable professionals legitimized by a violent institution. The same institution that I am seeking validation from. True. Honesty resists simplicity. So, they gave this woman a PhD in clinical psychology for a paper where she interviewed herself about how all of clinical psychology is illegitimate and apparently racist.
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't get more damning than that, I think, in a dissertation where you're just throwing the entire field you're appealing to under the bus. So this would be like giving an evolutionary biology PhD to a young Earth creationist, someone who doesn't believe in evolution at all. Her first chapter explicitly rejects Western empirical methods as what she calls a detached objectivity. She rejects, quote, discrete variables, strict operationalizations, and even causal relationships. She says that while she is, quote, willing to begrudgingly concede that there are some fields of study for which empirical methods might be helpful, begrudgingly concede that, these methods inflict ontological and epistemic violence onto living beings, capital B there, with the nuanced multitudes we embody.
Embody, remember, it comes back to embodiment. So she doesn't believe in variables or causal relationships. I feel like those are important concepts in any form of medicine or psychology or science.
Yeah, they're absolutely fundamental. So instead of these rigorous methods, she proposes what she calls, quote, a human science framework that, quote, knowingly and enthusiastically wades into existential waters, centering subjectivity, felt senses, and fidelity to lived experiences.
Yes, centering subjectivity and wading into existential waters. How very scientific.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's totally bizarre. So, and because of her disdain for, again, what she says, quote, the cisgender heterosexual white men that have dominated the ivory tower
Oh
and clinical
boy.
psychology itself, who she claims have been and are actively harmful to people like her. She claims that she chose an autoethnographic approach because she, quote, deserves to see herself in the institutions she participates in and contributes to. I think we're going to need another dramatic reading of this next part, Brad.
I'm a first generation immigrant. I'm Caribbean. I'm trans. I'm gender fluid. I'm a lesbian. Academia has not historically been welcoming. Psychology has been and continues to be actively harmful to folks whose positionalities and identities I share. Yes, college campuses notoriously hostile to gay people. It is my political ideals that partially fuel my desires to engage in autoethnographic research. Yep, that's clear actually. Back to the quote. I deserve to see myself reflected in the institutions I participate in and contribute to. I want to feel welcomed. I want to feel like it's possible for me to thrive here. That's what representation does for us. It reveals what's possible. Autoethnographic work is theory made flesh with first person narratives that help dust away the veil of ignorance that facilitates dehumanization.
Wow.
So it's a lot of it's giving entitled. She's like, I'm entitled to just talk about myself because I belong here and it should all resemble me and you're all evil and bad.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the overtly political nature of it too is what really stands out. So she says that she, quote, intentionally chose an autoethnographic methodology because it's inherently political. So she spent the last 5 years in graduate school, and she admits that this entire time was spent reading, quote, memoir and creative nonfiction written by trans, queer, immigrant, and BIPOC folks during my tenure as an academic because I felt so thoroughly isolated. Personally, I just think she might be kind of lazy and not cut out for graduate school if that's what she was doing for the whole 5 years.
Yeah, a lot of this sounds like you entered into ChatGPT, come up with a woke rationale for why I don't have to do my homework.
Yeah, the PhD's on why she shouldn't have done a rigorous PhD, basically.
So, were there any conclusions? I mean, that's probably too much to ask for this kind of, research in air quotes, but do we have anything to work here?
No, there's there's no conclusion. I mean, as she said herself, the entire point of the dissertation was to have her personal story reflected in the institutions, whatever that means. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just an exercise in pure narcissism.
And what does this connect to in terms of the bigger picture problems that we talk about on this podcast in academia and higher ed? Because I'm sure they're not all this bad, but there's a real problem in the PhD pipeline, right?
There's a massive problem in it for sure. And I always try not to portray like these specific authors, the people who are getting the PhDs. It's like they're not really the problem. It's like the system that allows them to float to the top and puts them through it. So the main issue here that I see it is that the fact that there was an entire PhD committee that actually signed off on this train wreck of a dissertation. If their job as a committee is to evaluate quality, to make sure that boxes are checked, and that it's supposed to be quality control. And if their job isn't to let nonsense like this not get past them, what point do they serve? Like this woman's going on to be a clinical psychologist, and the committee has a duty to ensure that a PhD in that field means something real, that it's an honest signal of expertise. But then we have a person here who not only doesn't contribute to the field of clinical psychology in any meaningful way with data and controlled experiments, but actively rejects the entire field entirely. So why in the hell are you giving a PhD to a woman in clinical psychology then if she just rejects this entire thing?
I agree with you that the dissertation board here, or the PhD committee, would be the real problem because, they're approving somebody with the credentials they will need to work with patients. So at the bare minimum, they have a responsibility to make sure that those patients are being taken care of by somebody who knows what they're talking about, not somebody who rejects the entire canon of clinical psychology. So they're really totally off the reservation. But what do we know? We're just, like she said, cisgender white men. We can't possibly understand the lived experiences of a queer, Cuban, gender fluid lesbian. Okay, guys, let us know what you think of that really wild paper. Now we're going to move on to the supporters only section of the show and go through a really bizarre NPR article pushing woke pseudoscience about the sex binary. Plus, Colin's going to tell us about a pretty crazy experience he had in California where they were debating transgender woman athletes, so biological males in women's sports, where the people who opposed that kind of thing were compared to Nazis. Yes, seriously, Colin's going to tell us about all of that and more on the other side of the paywall. Please do consider becoming a supporter and signing up on Substack, linked in the description or below. It's the best way to support our work and help push back on the insanity that's taking over our world. Regardless, thanks for tuning in. Please do hit that like button and comment with your thoughts below if you're watching us on YouTube. And now, on with the show.